Well, 2 Samuel chapter 19. Last week, we left with David grieving over Absalom. They have given him the news that his son is dead. In the last verse of chapter 18, we'll see reiterated in this chapter. But he says, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would God I had died for thee. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." So in chapter 19, what we're getting ready to have happen, and we'll be discussing this morning, is how do we handle the times in our life when we're under great duress? How do we handle each other in the situation? And we'll see how people handle David, and we'll see how David handles people. And we'll sit here as Saturday morning quarterbacks and see who had the proper responses and who did not have the proper responses, and we'll try to see what we can learn from it so that we'll do better. Because I know, speaking for myself, I know I can do better. So starting with verse 19, or chapter 19, verse 1, it was told Joab, "Behold, the king weepeth and mourneth for Absalom." And the victory that day was turned in the mourning unto all the people. For the people heard say that day how the king was grieved for his son. And the people gat them by stealth that day into the city, as people being ashamed steal away when they flee in battle. That is, they move secretly. They don't want to be seen. You remember growing up and you knew your dad was mad at you or something like that, and you were like trying to avoid him? Well, they're trying to avoid David right now. They're very uncomfortable. I mean, they just won a battle. It's a very difficult situation right now. But what the king is doing, verse 4, the heat covered his face, and the king cried with a loud voice, "Oh, my son Absalom! Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." Well, after a while, I'm putting this in here. Joab gets tired of this. Joab's a get it done kind of person. And he sees that the people are confused. And Joab came into the house to the king and said, "Thou hast shamed this day the faces of all thy servants, which this day have saved thy life, and the lives of thy sons and of thy daughters, and the lives of thy wives and the lives of thy concubines. In that thou lovest thine enemy, in that thou lovest thine enemies, and hatest thy friends. For thou hast declared this day that thou regardest neither princes nor servants. For this day I perceive that if Absalom had lived and all we had died this day, then it had pleased thee well. Now therefore arise, go forth, and speak comfortably unto thy servants. For I swear by the Lord, if thou go not forth, there will not tarry one with thee this night, and that thou wilt be worse unto thee than all the evil that befell thee from thy youth until now." We'll stop right there. So what do you think about Joab's handling of that matter?
Joab wasn't concerned about the kingdom. He was concerned about himself and how he would look, because he was the one, if you remember, he reconciled Absalom to David, but he also murdered Absalom. And so, reading through this, I don't think you'll find that any time that Joab actually went to God for anything. He was a great military man. He was all about himself. He had his own plan, his own program, and he kind of proceeded with it. So, because we know that in the end, the same self-centeredness that he had, what caused his demise. But he's concerned that the king look good because he's here he said there was a victory in the battle, but to King David, his son was killed, so that wasn't a victory to him. So Joab was wanting the people to, to be joyful because the battle had been won, but he was concerned that David was going to bring that down, so he was concerned to get David to, hey, look, man up. So that was kind of my take from reading that.
Good. So anybody else?
Well, I think he was giving pretty good advice here, because if David had not went out, I think it would have been kind of like the people would have been split. So to me, it seems kind of like he played the part here like a vice president to the president.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my take on that.
Okay. Anybody else?
I reckon David's not in a very good emotional state, and he does need someone to help him through his grief counseling, but he's not able to fulfill his role right now. It seems like he came from a very weak spiritual condition. He wasn't walking with the Lord before, and now he's still weak, and now he's emotionally grieved, and it looks like there's a lot of blunt truth there, but maybe David needs some help emotionally, but for the sake of what needs to be done, David's doing it wrong. He's unable to fulfill his role right now.
So, do we know for sure, Bob thinks that Joab's being selfish here. Do we know for a fact that Joab is being selfish and not just simply trying to get the right thing done? Trying to protect the king from even maybe himself? Do we know that for sure?
He uses David's worst moments to try to motivate him.
I think he's just fed up with him.
Yeah, but he reminds him that, you killed Uriah the Hittite. I mean, not so many words, but he alludes to that because in verse 7 he said, "Now therefore arise, go forth and speak comfortably unto thy servants, for I swear by the Lord, if thou go not forth, there will not tarry one with thee this night, and that will be worse unto thee than all the evils that befell thee from thy youth unto now." So he kind of alludes to, look, hey, and Joab was the one that had a hand in Uriah the Hittite being killed.
So, is he referring simply to that event, or is he referring to all the evil to include the time from David was a youth, where he was fighting the Philistines and having, where the battle was, where he was running away as a fugitive, and even pre-existing that event? Is he including those times as well in this commentary about what's going to happen if David doesn't go out and assert his welcoming the people who have just basically fought for him?
Restored.
True.
I mean, I kind of get the impression, just by some of the ways that this is worded, that Joab is really just fed up with David. He's frustrated, he's annoyed. I think part of that could be guilt, knowing that he killed Absalom,
right,
and he thought he was justified to do it, and now David's over here mourning Absalom and saying, "Oh, what a terrible thing." And I think he's frustrated because he's like, he was your enemy, and now I think he's trying to justify that. And I can even see, maybe in verse 6, where it almost seems like he's shouting. He could be yelling at David. And, and then he goes on to verse 7, basically being like, if you don't go out and do something about this, you think what's happened to you up until now is bad? Everybody's going to believe you.
Right. Is that true, though? Are his words true?
Oh, I don't know if they're true or not.
What do you think?
I mean, keep reading.
Part 2.
If you continue to read, you'll notice that there is a movement of some people about even accepting David back as king. And there seems to be this movement that, and they could have been loyal to Absalom, and now they lost, but now they're, David has to come back into Jerusalem. And if Joab was against David, this would have been a prime time for him to lead the coup to overtake him. but he didn't. Instead, he goes in and establishes him back on the throne, and gives the advice that, look, you've got an army here that could be loyal to you, but if you start whining over that we killed the enemy. Remember that there was a civil war that took place there. There were men who gave their lives. They fought. This was not just handed over to them. And if you don't recognize their sacrifice, then the army is might not come back on your side. And so it is a unsettling time right now. But Joab, it appears, Joab gives the advice that David needs to hear to keep him or bring him back on the throne.
Okay, good. Fred?
Yes, some just passing observations there. Absalom killed his brother Amnon for abusing and raping Tamar, their sister. So you could make the case that Absalom was living on borrowed time anyway, and that Joab just carried out the sentence that was delayed or ignored. And unrelated to that observation, I see a principle here that when we are in the throes of some deep negative emotion, be it grief, anger, discouragement, depression, whatever it is, we don't make good decisions. And we really need a counselor to come in and help us, because however great we are, however lucid we are, that's just not the time to be making big decisions.
Right.
Very good, thank you.
I don't know if this is applicable, but what about if my son killed my wife and I was grieving over my son dying and not my wife? Then that's just not right. Something's wrong. And somebody comes to me and said, Dave, you're on that. He's the murderer. Why are you grieving over him?
Grieve over Tamar.
He's the enemy.
Well,
So you can see even in this group, there's a difference of how, you can see a variance here, can you not? And what I want to point out here is it's so easy for us to see things in black and white. And I'm not trying to say that everything's gray, because it's not. There is black and white. But sometimes things can be a little more nuanced than we're willing to admit. And I think sometimes we don't give credence to another person's perspective on things and how it might truly be affecting them. And I think that there's room here to discover how that could be. I'm going to read one commentary here just as a perspective on this, to see what you think anyway. Faithful in the main and shrewd as Joab was, he was no doubt a useful officer. As we've said, there are certain things that needed to be done. And David did need a counselor to step in and help, no doubt, because of his emotional state. But his harshness and want of feeling went far to neutralize the benefit of his services. It ought surely to be one of the benefits of civilization and culture that where painful duties have to be done, they should be done with much consideration and tenderness. For the real business of life is not so much to get right things done in any way as to diffuse a right spirit among men and get them to do things well. The call to the royal bridegroom in the 45th Psalm is to gird his sword on his thigh and ride forth prosperously because of truth and mercy and righteousness. Notice mercies in the middle between truth and righteousness.
Who wrote that?
I don't know the name of the person, honestly. In his eagerness to get a certain thing done, Joab showed little or no regard for those higher interests to which outward acts should ever be subordinate. So we'll see, in contrast to Joab, how David handles things, even though he was the one that was distraught. We're going to see in the rest of this chapter several encounters with people who have hurt him, have harmed him. One who has actually helped him also. And we'll see how he handles them. So is it possible that we can agree and say that, yes, Joab had certain things that needed to be done in a right way, but that he could have handled it in a more elegant way, in a more merciful way, to do the thing that needed to be done? Is that possible?
I think so. And that's good what you brought out there. But at the same time, it's kind of murky. When he says, care more about your enemies than your friends. But you got to realize that David's son was his son before he was his enemy. And naturally, he's going to be broken up by his death. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like it's this way and that way. Mm-hmm. But I think he had to be told, about this kind of thing.
One of the things that I'm going to impose on you this morning, if anything, is this idea. Oftentimes it's useful to acknowledge where another person is. Even though you're getting ready to correct them, even though you're getting ready to try to bring them back into a better place, it doesn't hurt usually to acknowledge that they probably are justified in feeling how they feel to some extent. So why not acknowledge that? Because then you win them over to trust you, that you're going to actually be of assistance and help to them in that time. Bob?
A couple things. I guess my reading ahead, and just out of interest for you, start reading sometimes and you want to know what the rest of the story is. So reading ahead, I guess it affected my take on this, knowing what other things Joab did on future stories. But that being said, I don't think there's a father who, regardless of what your child done, you wouldn't still love them.
Right. Amen.
I mean, there's just that. It's hard for me, particularly a person who's a child of God, would still love that son or that daughter, regardless of what they've done. And David's the same thing there, and he's mourning. And so sometimes when we're dealing with situations, just like you said, we have to show that empathy before we can do correction that will actually be taken in the right spirit. Because when you just hit like Joab, like he just hit David there, you can imagine as a father, your first thought is, man, this man's crazy. He's not even taking into account that my son's dead.
Yes.
And how much I love my son, regardless of what he's done.
Right.
And so I think you're exactly right. We have to be careful how we approach people in situations, because we don't know. There's people every Sunday that we go past in church and we shake their hand and we welcome them or we greet them. But inside, we don't really know what's going on in their life.
That's right.
So when the Holy Spirit seems to impress upon you to say a word of encouragement or to go the extra mile for that person, it's probably a good thing to do it, because we don't know what they're going through. I can remember there's a gentleman that's here today, came to me. With such love and graciousness, at a time when I was really going through some difficulty. And God used him. He'd never know the good that he done that day. But why? He didn't know anything about my situation. I hadn't talked to anybody about it. But God knew. And he allowed God to use him.
We're so quick to try to give people the solution because we know the solution. You know, us men, in dealing with our wives, we're often told, you know, when we go to these marriage retreats, things like that, just listen. You know, they're not looking for a solution. They just want you to listen. Well, that frustrates most of us because we're like, why wouldn't they want the solution? You know, what good does it do to just talk about it and not have the solution? That doesn't make any sense, right? But there's something there that is a need that somebody keeps trying to beat into our head that, wait a minute, what they want to feel in the moment is to be understood. And David was grieving, and he needed somebody to come alongside him and to at least, you know, make some attempt to understand while he was being brought out of this time of despair. This is what I'm trying to say is Joab was, Bob, I don't know if he was selfish. I think he might have meant well. I think he was trying to do right, but he just saw things in such stark black and white terms. He didn't know how to handle the situation properly. That's my opinion.
We don't. Why do we say that though? You know, we don't really see anything in the verses that said Joab did the wrong thing. In fact, the king arose. It has a positive thing. He arose and he moved.
What I'm saying and what I'm suggesting is that he could have been more merciful in his approach to David.
But
because
go ahead.
Because, well, I just believe that's the case.
Do you think that if Joab, I picture this guy being rough and used to just giving commands and taking situations by the hand and making decisions and just going with it.
Mm-hmm.
You know that stereotype.
Right.
And sometimes we just need a kick in the pants. We need someone just to, confront us head on and tell us off and to get us to move. And then there's other times that you're exactly right what you've said about understanding a person what they're going through and being able to get into their shoes and relate to them from that perspective.
Let me ask you this, Dave, since you asked this question. What position is David? Who is he?
Yes. That's right.
He's the king, but right now he's not fulfilling the
So
role
is
of
it
king.
ever right to talk to someone in authority in the way that Joab is talking to him? Which I see as
That's
disrespectful.
Right. That's right.
I think he's faithful are the wounds of a friend, but deceitful are because he's telling him the truth.
Yeah, I think
Verse 6, he says, look, you should be loving these other people. Maybe you need to recuse yourselves. How can you fulfill the role? Okay, you're the father, he's the son, but you're also the king, and you are failing as a king right now. You are not doing what's right. And so another king may have to come up. If you don't do your role as a king, and in verse 6 says, I reckon you'd be happy if everybody else had died and he hadn't. I mean, you're not thinking right as a king.
So you think it's okay for him to talk this way?
It looks like there was a positive result. Yes,
Okay.
I did.
Okay. Fred.
Where is he being disrespectful here?
That's what
Okay, so I'm going to, let's go back to verse. Okay, so let's just say that someone comes into a king, and if you look at how Joseph or Daniel
Right.
Address even a foreign king, they would come in and say, "O king, live forever." They would have a type of obeisance. They would show the proper respect. If we walk into the president, the United States office, you would speak to him as Mr. President. You would have there's a certain, even in the military, when it's an officer that outranks you, you speak to them, sir, and you give them that deference. And if you have something that you need to make an appeal about, you do it in a respectful way. You use words and phrases, and you don't do it in a way that pigeonholes them or boxes them in a corner or makes them feel, like you are attacking them. Okay? And this is a verbal assault he's made here. There's no way around it. He says, you act like you love the enemy more than you love us. That's an attack. Right or wrong, it's an attack. Okay, Fred.
Yeah, I think there's a difference in approaching a king that, as an outsider that comes into his presence, but it would probably not be true that a close working, associate like Joab, you aren't going to do obeisance every time you walk into the room and you're in and out relating to him all day long. It would, I think, be unseemly to expect or assume that happened. And but yeah, this is tough love, and is this what David needs?
Yeah, I'd rather have Mike Pence tell Trump the truth. If there's something he needs to tell him.
Yeah, and David obviously had confidence in Joab's advice, or he wouldn't have been with him so long. Do you think Joab probably realizes that if he hadn't removed the problem, Absalom, what would David have done about it?
Absolutely. I think Joab thinks that it was the right thing to do.
And it would have just continued on and on
Right.
and on.
All I'm saying is there's a case to be made here, and I'm going to attempt to make the case. I'm not going to back down off this. That we can do things we can bring truth in a merciful way with righteousness. If the mercy is missing in our attempt to do right, we may accomplish the good, but we may indefinitely harm the relationship in the process. Bob.
It's good to remember that sometimes it's not so much what you say that causes the offense, it's how you say it.
Exactly.
And how you deliver that message.
Yes.
And in this day, you didn't just go, I don't care you were, you didn't just go before the king without proper protocol. I mean, Nathan took a chance when he confronted David. David could have had him killed. But because God used Nathan, that didn't happen.
But even Nathan, excuse me for interrupting, used a story to soften the message, and the only thing that he said was a true statement, which was not a harsh statement, "Thou art the man." He didn't say, "Thou art the man." I don't believe he says, "Thou art the man."
You know what?
David wasn't offended, was he?
I agree with that, but it's like, even I used to use the military kind of analogy. I don't care how many times I've been in to see the colonel. I never walked in and said, "Hey, Joe, how's it going?"
Right.
That's right.
You always use proper protocol,
That's right.
regardless. I mean, I may have worked for him for 4 or 5 years. We may have had time to be socialized off duty, off post, whatever. But when it was in his official capacity, I wouldn't even think about calling him first.
Yeah, and you don't tell them. You appeal to them.
Right.
Okay. You, sir, would you consider this? Sir, you do it in a deferential, meek way. And this is how it ought to be done with any authority. Hey, John.
Go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say, I'm kind of in support of your point. What it really comes down to is not the message Joab is trying to get across. I think we can all agree that what Joab is trying to get David to do is probably helpful, a good thing. I agree that David needs somebody right now to counsel him. I think the issue is the way he's approaching it, and that's really what it comes down to. I think you may have said it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And, I think there's this misconception in a lot of conservative circles, and I got a lot of this growing up, where it is that whole tough love thing. Forget emotions. You don't need those. You need to hear the truth, and you need to hear it right now. You need to hear me tell it to you right now. And it's almost just like browbeating people. You've heard the term, beat someone over the head with the Bible.
And then they want to know why people run as soon as they get a chance.
Exactly.
Right.
You have to appeal to for one thing, you have to appeal to people's personalities, because people with different personalities are going to accept things different ways. And I know sometimes we hear that and we're like, oh, okay. We don't really have to, because truth is truth. But look at the way Jesus approached people. Look at the way, godly men in the Bible approach people. They approach people differently based on, one, the situation, and two, the personality of the person they're approaching. And if we take those two things out of the equation, the situation, the circumstances, and then the personality of the person, we're going to be completely ineffective in counseling, in witnessing, in really in any way we approach it. It's people skills, is what it is. And that's one thing that I think Joab is a little bit lacking in. If you look at his history, I think he has very, very good motives a lot of the times, but he seems to be quite lacking in people skills.
Hey, just real quick, Dave, remember how you have told me on occasion when you were talking to one of your children, and you would say that sometimes you have to apologize first? Well, you're actually, as the leader, conceding your authority when you do that to win the relationship. And you're using that as a life lesson, right? So if it's true for that in a child situation, all the more true with peer-to-peer and peer-to-authority. Would you agree?
And the relationship always makes a difference.
That's right.
Yeah, it just comes into the picture. You or I will more likely take corrective criticism and help from someone who we know has been that example before us.
Yes.
Than someone who just you don't have no idea. I mean, you may know them, but you don't really know them as far as their character, their personality, their spirituality, their walk with the Lord. It makes a big difference, and I think that was part of what played in here is Joab's relationship with David, because, like you said, he had been the one that killed Uriah. He had been the one that tried to restore the relationship between Absalom and David. He had also been the one that murdered Absalom. So I think that may come into play. And of course, we shouldn't allow that to overrule the way we should approach people. But sometimes we think we know that person so well, we're so familiar with them that what they say, the old term familiarity breeds contempt.
Right.
So sometimes that comes into play also.
Right. Well, let's move on. Let's find out how David handles.
Can I have a word on
Yeah,
that?
go ahead.
Sorry. I see that it was kind of rough the way you had approached it, David, but at the same time, I see him being factual. And if you notice, David he didn't get offended behind that. He rose up and acted when he approached him that way. But it's like, again, it's a two-way street here. David was intact with spirituality.
Right.
In other words, he mentioned you love your enemies. Well, Jesus said, love your enemies. Do good to them that hate you. So David was much like that all along. When they come and curse him, he said, let them curse. And things like that. So I don't think Joab was really being mean. You have to realize that Joab was David's right-hand man. And he could probably get to David easier than anybody else.
So you don't think when Joab accuses David of shaming the people, thou hast shamed this day the faces of all thy servants?
That was true.
Well, yeah, the way he dealt with it, like he said, he forgot about the people and put everything towards.
So what we're not talking about truth here. We're talking, because you're right, it is true. We're talking about how he said it and how he might have said it better. That's what we're talking about.
Well, we can't put words in his mouth.
Well, I'm attempting to.
Hey, Chuck,
I'm saying that one of the lessons we must consider as we talk to each other is how we come across. Even as I'm teaching right now, I need to be careful. I need to be considerate. I need to be deferential, even if I think I'm right.
I think David was in cardiac arrest, and he needed the AED charge. I think we're talking about two different situations. And so what everybody's saying is true. What you're saying is truth for this situation, and then but these are totally unrelated. And like he said, David wasn't offended.
We don't know that.
Well, we don't know that he was offended or that it was wrong. Or I think David's in cardiac arrest. He's paralyzed, and he is going to not make any progress until a faithful friend runs him and says, "Get up."
Well,
and now, David, you had something to say.
Let's continue on in the passage.
David, here. I'm sorry.
Adam.
Just want to say something. We all know that King David, he was not a scorner. He was not a fool. Generally speaking, he was not. And the Bible says, a wise son heareth his father's instructions. So when David gets instructed, no matter how it comes across, he's going to take it. But a scorner heareth not rebuke.
Who?
A scorner heareth not rebuke. A person that, to give truth to them that love it not, gives them more multiplied reasons to misinterpret it. That's quoting Ravi Zacharias. And another quote from Ravi Zacharias is this: you don't cut off somebody's nose before you give them a rose. And sometimes us men, when we're giving instruction, we are prone to bring the object of our instruction. We are prone to give instruction that provokes wrath. That's why the New Testament says, it commands fathers not to provoke your children to wrath. Why? Not because fathers have a difficulty time giving instruction, but because when we give instruction, it is our natural response. It is our natural reflex to provoke who we're giving instruction to wrath.
Right.
We can say things in an unkind way that subverts the truth that we're trying to give. And I've heard this quote as well: truth without love is not truth at all. Truth without love is a lie. And going to King David and Absalom and Joab, if Joab hadn't killed Absalom, who would have been the next king? The Bible, I tried to look this up, couldn't find it, but I thought it said that David intended for Absalom to be the king. Solomon at this point in time is a young little boy. And so Joab, he doesn't want to serve Absalom. He doesn't want him to come back and be king. Who would want to serve Absalom? So Joab comes into the tent, and he does give David sound advice. He gives him instruction. And to David's case, if he hears any instruction, anything at all, if he hears anything that's true, he's going to receive it and act upon it because he's a wise king. He's not a Nebuchadnezzar. You can't provoke. No matter how David would have responded, you could have slapped David in the face and he would still love you. Hence why he loved Absalom, who he was trying to kill. So of course David is going to take some wise counsel, even if it's coming across in a harsh manner. But I'm of the opinion that what Joab said was wise, because there was a revolt in the making if David had not addressed the people in a very, approving manner.
All right, well, let's continue.
So yeah,
So let's
I just wanna
continue.
say
Thank
that.
you. Let's continue on because we've got a little bit bogged down there. Appreciate all of your input, really do. Something to think about. So what happens in starting with verse 8? Then the king arose and sat in the gate, and they told unto all the people, saying, Behold, the king doth sit in the gate. And all the people came before the king, for Israel had fled every man to his tent. So they really wanted to come out and see. Okay, let's see the king. And I imagine him sitting there. He's older now. He's pale, tired. He's been in tears and mourning. He probably looks pretty sad, pretty beat up. And you would expect that. And all the people were at strife throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, The king saved us out of the hand of our enemies. They were at strife. They were arguing with each other. They were striving with each other about what to do. And so some of them are saying, well, the king saved us out of the hand of our enemies, and he delivered us out of the hand of the Philistines. Remember back then when he did that? And now he has fled out of the land for Absalom. He's the victim here. We should be supporting him. And Absalom, whom we appointed, they're taking some ownership here, is dead in battle. Now, therefore, why speak ye not a word of bringing the king back? See, there's people that are not talking about putting the king back in power, or acknowledging him as the king. And King David sent to Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, saying, Speak unto the elders of Judah, saying, Why are ye the last to bring the king back to his house, seeing the speech of all Israel is come to the king, even to his house? So it seems like in this moment, Judah is the ones that are kind of holding out. That will flip-flop in chapter 20, and Judah will be the ones that actually have his back, and Israel is the ones that's going to go follow another potential leader. David appeals, Ye are my brethren. Now remember, some of these are men who have revolted against him. Some of these people are ones who fought, and he's speaking to them in the gate, and he's calling them brothers. Notice his conciliatory tones here. Okay? You're my bones and my flesh. Wherefore then are ye the last to bring back the king? And he's telling Zadok and Abiathar to go communicate that message. He's actually entrusting them to say that. Verse 13, And say ye to Amasa, Art thou not of my bone and of my flesh? God do so to me, and more also, if thou be not captain of the host before me continually in the room of Joab. He's basically saying, look, I'll put you back in a position in my cabinet. I'll give you power. I'm not going to fight you. He's being very conciliatory.
Who was Amasa?
Amasa was let me just click on it here and see if I can give you a quick, anybody that wants to answer that can. He was the son of Ithra, or Jether, by Abigail, David's sister. So he would have been like a nephew, I believe. He joined in Absalom's rebellion, was appointed commander-in-chief, and suffered defeat by Joab.
So he was commander.
Well, he's getting ready to get defeated. Joab's going to give him a knife in the rib.
But I mean, Amasa was the commander of Absalom's forces.
Yes.
He was David's nephew.
And David is willing to bring him back in. Okay? So notice his tone here. He was the one who was wrong. He was the one that was run out of town. And yet, look at how he's handling this. So David in verse 16, or a couple minutes left, David pardons his enemies. Shimei, the son of Gera, however you say it, a Benjamite, which was of Bahurim, hasted and came down with the men of Judah to meet King David. And there were 1,000 men of Benjamin with him, and Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, and his 15 sons, and his 20 servants with him. And they went over Jordan before the king. And there went over a ferry boat to carry over the king's household, and to do what he thought was good. And Shimei, the son of Gera, fell down before the king as he was come over Jordan, and said unto the king, Let not my lord impute iniquity unto me. Now this man has been fighting him, and now he's begging for mercy. Neither do thou remember that which thy servant did perversely, the day that my lord the king went out of Jerusalem, that the king should take it to his heart. For thy servant doth know that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I am come the first this day of all the house of Joseph to go down to meet the Lord, my lord the king. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, answered and said, Shall not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed? Remember Zeruiah, this man was the one who was yelling at him and throwing stones and just kicking up all kinds of noise, when David was leaving Jerusalem. Remember that scene? And they wanted to kill him then, and David said, no, let him go. This is probably something I deserve from the Lord.
He said, God told me to curse him.
Yeah, exactly. And so David said, what have I to do with you, ye sons of Zeruiah, that ye should this day be adversaries unto me? Shall there any man be put to death this day in Israel? For do not I know that I am this day king over Israel? He's seeing himself as king. He has the authority on how to handle the situation, and he's showing great mercy here. Great mercy. And the chapter kind of continues in that vein. We'll pick it up next week.
When you said, it looks like he forgave him, but we would need to look at the last thing that David said right before he died, which was 1 Kings 2, 8 and 9, and then that has a whole different picture. He didn't, so I don't think we should think that King David forgave him that day. It looks that way.
But he shows mercy in that he could have had him put to death.
He didn't let him die that day, but then right before he died, moments before David died, he told his son Solomon to kill him.
There must have been something in the interim that caused that. We'll see.
And Joab had said in verse 6, in that thou lovest thine enemies and hatest thy friends. So he was loving the ones that were against him here in this rest of the chapter.
Right.
It's true that Joab saw that.
Yeah. So I can see that there's different personalities in here, and different ways of wanting to handle things, and different ways of looking at it. You can cut it with a knife, I can tell. But I'm presenting it to you as just something to consider, and let the Lord be our guide and the Holy Spirit be our teacher, okay? Ed?
Let's sing Rock of Ages, page 183. Page 183. Rock of Ages, cleft for me, let